Hello friends, today I'm going to can tomato sauce. This is just a basic tomato sauce. I have enough tomatoes from my garden, enough to make a batch of tomato sauce. Probably not enough to make a full batch. Probably I have 4 or 5 jars worth of tomato sauce. Anyway, I'll be using pint jars. These are smaller jars, obviously. And first, if you are going to do canning, first you have to make sure that the jar rims or the lips of the jars are free from cracks or nicks. You have to check the jars individually using your fingers. Make sure that there is nothing that's catching. Otherwise, if there are nicks or cracks, your vegetables or the content inside will not seal, so it will go bad quicker. And yeah, you don't want to use any nicked or cracked jars. Okay, after you choose the good jars, you can wash or sterilize the jars in a dishwasher using the hot cycle. And when it's done, just keep the jars in the dishwasher until you're ready to use them. Or you can boil water in a pot, and when the water's boiling, you can submerge the jars, the canning jars, individually for at least 5 minutes. And when they're done, you can lift the jars using a jar lifter. Okay, this process is hot, so you have to be extra careful. Make sure that you're using the proper kit or the proper tool using a jar lifter. And when your jars are ready, just set them aside until you're ready to fill them with the tomato sauce. Okay? Wash and clean the tomatoes thoroughly. Make sure that there are no bad spots. Remove the bad spots, of course. I have bigger variety of tomatoes. I also have smaller kind tomatoes, but it doesn't matter. Just use whatever tomatoes you have. Make sure that they're ripe, of course, because yeah, ripe ones are easy to process. In a small pot, put some water and bring the water to a boil and put the canning lids inside and boil them for about 5 to 10 minutes. And after boiling them, you can just let them sit in the pot until you're ready to use them. And for the canning rings, you don't have to sterilize them, but make sure they are washed with hot water, because it's good to wash them. Some of the lids have rust on them, so yeah, just to make them clean. The tomatoes are ready for cooking or for processing. All these tomatoes have been washed and bad spots have been removed. This one, they still have seeds and skin. These, I manually squeezed the tomato seeds out by squeezing them. But make sure when you do that there's an opening for you so that you can squeeze the tomato seeds easily. Just like that. You can cut crisscross cut, and you can easily do that with bigger tomatoes and harder ones. The skins are harder. And with the smaller tomatoes too, if there are no openings, so make sure that you make a crisscross cut like that, so it's easy to squeeze the seeds out. But so you can do either like that, you squeeze it out. You can either do the squeezing out of the seeds after you blanch the tomatoes, because the blanching of the tomatoes can easily peel the skin off. So it will cook, basically it will cook the layer of the skin, so you can remove the skin easily. So either way, this one I remove the seeds, and this one the seeds and skin are still intact. And I have boiling water over here, so I'm ready to submerge the tomatoes. I will blanch them for a few seconds, and I will transfer the tomatoes into a basin with ice cubes, so it will shock it so it does not continue to cook the tomatoes, because I need to remove the seeds of the tomatoes and the skin. Okay, let's do that slowly. About maybe 15 seconds. So I tested one of the tomatoes. The peeling comes off easily. So now is the time that I can transfer. I turn off the heat and I will transfer them to the basin with ice, because we don't want to cook them yet, because the purpose of the blanching is to remove the skin and the seeds. After the tomatoes have cooled off, after blanching and after putting them quickly in cold water, it's time to peel the skin off of the tomatoes. Processing tomato sauce can be time consuming, because if you want to do the standard of doing tomato sauce, you have to remove the skin and the seeds. There are several ways that you can do to make the process quicker. You remove, or you can just cut them up, including the seeds and peeling the skin, and using a food strainer or a food mill, you can eliminate the skin. That's another way to do it. What I'm doing right now is another way to do it, another method, because there's not a lot of tomatoes. After the tomatoes have cooled off, the blanched tomatoes, it's time to dice the tomatoes into smaller pieces, smaller cubes, just like this. And we're going to boil the tomatoes, the diced tomatoes, until the consistency is better and there's not a lot of juice, tomato juice. These tomatoes still have seeds because I did not squeeze out all of the seeds, and because just squeezing the seeds out manually, it's not really as effective as using a food strainer, the one that you use for, similar to the one that you use for doing applesauce. Don't waste the juice. The juice is high in nutrients. You can drink the juice, or you can make jam. Juice is very rich in vitamin C. Whoops! There you go. In a pot, put the diced tomatoes and wait until the tomatoes boil, and we're gonna cook it for a little bit until the desired consistency is achieved. We're gonna mash it for a little bit, but for now we're gonna wait until it boils, and we're gonna lower the heat and simmer it. The tomatoes boiling, and let's stir the tomatoes because we don't want the bottom to stick, and I'm using this masher to help loosen the tomatoes. And we're gonna keep the heat on medium, so that it will help with the evaporation and will help cook the tomatoes, and we will only be left with just the meat and a little bit of juice, because that's what we want. We want the consistency to be soft. So we'll just wait for a few more minutes for the tomatoes to be more loose and soft. After cooking the tomatoes, if you see that there's not a lot of juice or liquid, you will notice that the texture is different. Your tomatoes should be ready. And of course, don't forget to add salt. For 8 pounds tomatoes, you add 2 teaspoons of pickling salt or canning salt. I already put some canning or pickling salt, so I just need to cool this off, because what I want for my tomato sauce is the smooth kind. I want it to be smoother, So I'm going to process first. I'm going to put the tomatoes in a blender. But if you want a chunky tomato sauce, this is ready to go. This is ready to be put in the jars. Okay, but since I want my tomato sauce to be more smooth, so I'm going to blend this. So this is ready. I'm just going to wait for it to cool off. Okay. Blend briefly. You don't have to blend too long, just enough to break the chunky pieces. You can do pulse. There you go. Just a little bit more. That's it. The texture should be like this. And this is the kind I want, the tomato sauce that I want, and it's ready for jarring. Before you put the blended tomato sauce in the jars, you would need an acid, half a teaspoon of freshly squeezed lemon juice or bottled juice. I prefer the freshly squeezed lemon juice, or you can also use citric acid. You can buy citric acid in a natural store or any grocery stores that carry natural products. So what I do is I will just squeeze the lemons. For pint jars, you would need half a teaspoon of freshly squeezed lemon juice or bottled lemon juice. You can also use citric acid. The lemon juice, the sourness of it adds to the acidity and it helps with the preservation. Now you can add the tomato sauce. You can just pour in the jar slowly, like that. Make sure that there's enough headspace, at least an inch, between the neck and the lip. You can also use the funnel to make sure that all the sauce gets in there properly. So with the 8 pounds of tomatoes, it makes 3 pints of tomato sauce. So we have extra jars. This is a small batch. This is just to demonstrate how you can make tomato sauce from fresh tomatoes. As you can see, I did not fill the jars all the way up to the rim. Make sure that there's enough headspace right here on the neck area. And after you fill the jars, you wipe the rims with damp cloth. Make sure that there's no seeds or skin, because that would prevent the jars from sealing correctly or properly. Okay, make sure that you don't use the same spot when you wipe the jars. You have to move it each time so you don't transfer the debris or any skin that could have been on the other jars. Now this is ready for putting the lids and canning rings. Using a jar lifter, or you can use a tongue like this, gently put the canning lids on each jar. Careful because the lids are hot. There you go. And now you can screw on the lids, the rings. Screw on the rings tightly. Make sure that they're secure because it's important for the canning process. Now they're ready to be processed. We're going to do the boiling process, which is the water bath process. Water bath process is used or can be used for when you are doing canning using fruits, because fruits are acidic, but for vegetables you only do pressure canning. Since we're using pints, we're going to process this for about 30 minutes boiling. When the water starts boiling, we're going to set the timer for 30 minutes. And because my house is situated on a hill, I'm going to process this for 30 to 35 minutes. But if your house is located or situated below 1,000 feet altitude, you don't have to go above 35 minutes boiling process. Okay. I have here a canning rack. Even though I don't have a big batch, still I would like to use this because it helps protect the bottom of the jars and it keeps them in place. And notice that I did not put the jars too close to each other. That will give them space so they don't crack during the boiling process. Over here is a canning pot. I have water inside. I fill the water inside, and this is hot. I had it preheated because the jars are hot and I don't want to shock the jars, so I can safely lower this down, including the rack, like that. And I need to put more water because we need at least an inch water above the jars. That would help with the boiling process. Water bath canning, or the water process canning, requires at least an inch water above the jars. There you go. And we're gonna wait until the water boils, and then we can start timing when the water is boiling. I'm gonna cover this and we'll just wait. The water is boiling. Now we can lower the heat to medium low, and we can set the timer for 30 to 35 minutes. Since my elevation is on a hill, my house is situated on a hill, so I can safely time this batch for 35 minutes. Okay. We'll just have to wait until the boiling process is done. Time to turn the stove off. And after a few minutes, slowly open the lid of the canning pot. Make sure that you open it away from your face because the steam is hot. And there you go. It's still boiling. You can wait for a few minutes before you lift the tray, but it's okay. And now you can just sit it here like that and wait for the jars to naturally cool off. When the jar is starting to cool off, the middle part of the lid, the bulge part, will get sucked in because there's heat and pressure inside. So you will see the bulge part will become flattened or will become dented. So at this point, we'll just have to wait for the jars to cool off. And you will hear the popping sound, and you will know that your the vegetables or the tomato sauce that you canned have sealed completely. Let the jars cool off naturally. Do not touch the middle part. Do not touch the surface of the lid because it could affect the sealing. Did you hear that? That last jar there popped. Success! The tomato sauce canning or jarring process is done. After 12 hours or after the jars have completely cooled off, check the jars. Check the lids, make sure that the middle part of the center of the canning lids are slightly dented or more flat instead of it being raised up or bulging. So again, make sure that the lids are more flat or slightly dented because that means that the jar has completely sealed. And if you do notice that there are jars that did not seal, or if you do notice that there are lids that are bulging, you can re-jar or reprocess. Transfer the contents inside to a different jar and do the boiling process again. You can eat the contents as soon as you can, or you can refrigerate the jar with the contents with the tomato sauce inside. It should stay in the refrigerator for at least 3 weeks before it goes bad. Okay? And before storing these jars, I'd recommend for you to remove the rings, because if you keep the rings on the jars, the rings will get rusty. It's better if you rinse or wash them and dry them completely before you store them. These rings are reusable, and these jars are also reusable. So you can use these jars. Once you emptied these jars, you can reuse them again for when you do the next canning or jarring. Wash the jars, rinse them because they get sticky, especially after canning or jarring tomatoes or fruits. And after you rinse the jars, dry the lids and write the date and the name of the vegetable or the tomato sauce. After you have removed the canning rings, it is better to wait for a few more hours, at least 6 hours, before you store these jars, because sometimes the pressure inside gets released after you've removed the rings, especially if it did not process properly. So it's just better to wait and check again later, just to make sure that the seal is still intact. The tomato sauce inside is ready for consumption anytime, any day, next month, next year, even after 5 years from now. As long as the seals are still intact, the contents inside should be good and it will keep for a long time. You can use the tomato sauce for any recipe that requires tomato sauce. You can even make pasta sauce or pizza sauce with these tomato sauce. You just have to season them and it's yummy. And once you've emptied these jars, again, don't throw the jars away because these jars are special jars just for canning and jarring. They are reusable, and these rings are also reusable. As long as the rings are not loaded with rust, they can be used multiple times. For the lids, some people reuse the lids as long as they are not dented. I normally don't reuse the non-reusable lids, but there are reusable lids that are designed for multiple usage, and that would be for another topic or another video that I'll be showing. But anyway, again, you can do canning or jarring. It's not hard. It's actually easy as long as you have the proper tool and the proper kit. You just need to be careful and follow the correct instruction and the manual, and you will be successful. It's a nice hobby and it's very useful. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to share this simple process with your families and friends. Thank you for watching.